My son called me on a Tuesday morning, his voice bright with something I hadn't heard in years. Excitement. Real excitement. Not the kind he used when he needed money. He told me the grand opening of his restaurant was Saturday night. He said it was going to be the biggest night of his life. Then he paused, and in that pause I heard everything I needed to know. "Dad, I don't think you should come," he said. "It's a very specific vibe, very upscale. You'd feel out of place." I sat in my truck in the parking lot of the hardware store, and I didn't say a word. I just listened to the silence hum between us like a live wire. 3 weeks later, he called again, screaming. This time, the landlord had sent a termination notice. Did I know anything about it? Could I make a call? Could I fix it? I let him finish. Then I said, "Son, didn't I warn you?" But before I tell you how a 62-year-old electrician in work boots ended his son's restaurant before the second month of business, let me take you back to where this story actually starts. Hit that like button if you believe respect is not something you earn with a dress code. Subscribe to this channel if you have ever been made to feel small by someone who was only standing tall because of you. And leave me a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. I love knowing who's listening. My name is Walter Greer. I am 62 years old. My hands are rough. My truck has 180,000 miles on it and a crack in the windshield I keep meaning to fix. I have been an electrician since I was 19 years old, working commercial jobs, wiring office buildings, warehouses, strip malls, and restaurants all over the Nashville metro area. I am not a man who went to college. I am a man who learned to read blueprints before I could read a lease agreement, and I fixed that gap later in life by hiring people smarter than me and listening very carefully to what they said. What my son and his wife did not know, what they had never bothered to ask, was that for the last 20 years, I had been quietly buying the buildings I wired. When a property owner couldn't make payroll and needed to sell fast, I was the man who answered the phone. When the market stumbled, I bought. When everyone else was selling, I held. I did not do this to get rich. I did it because I grew up poor enough to understand that the only security that lasts is land under your feet and roof over your head. And I wanted my son to never feel the kind of fear I felt as a boy. My son is 34 years old. His name does not matter for this story. What matters is that he is smart in the way that only people who have never struggled are smart. He is confident and charming, and absolutely certain that the world was designed with him in mind. His wife is 31. She comes from money on her side, real money, the kind that comes with a family name on a hospital wing, but her parents spent their lives making sure she felt that money was a personality trait rather than an accident of birth. The two of them together are a spectacular combination of entitlement and ambition. For 3 years, I paid the rent on their apartment in East Nashville, a beautiful 2-bedroom in a converted warehouse building with exposed brick and original hardwood floors. I paid the utilities. I covered the car note on her SUV when they fell behind. I wired $40,000 into my son's account when he and his wife decided they wanted to open a restaurant. They told me it was going to be an intimate farm-to-table concept. Southern ingredients, modern technique. They had the name picked out already. They had a designer picked out. They had a social media strategy. The one thing they did not have was money. And that is where I came in. I want to be honest here. The way I was not honest with myself for a long time. I knew what I was doing. When I handed over that money, I was not investing. I was buying access. I was paying for the feeling of being needed, of being the man who made things possible. I thought that if I funded their dream, I would be woven into it. I thought my name would be part of the story they told. I was wrong. The restaurant was called Linden and Ash. It was located on a commercial strip in a neighborhood that had been steadily growing for the last 5 years. It was a good location. Dang, it was a good location. The build-out took 4 months and cost more than the original budget, which is how these things always go. And I covered the difference. By the time the doors were ready to open, I had given my son $63,000 in total. Not a loan, a gift. I never asked for paperwork. I never asked for equity. I just wanted him to succeed. The grand opening was scheduled for a Saturday night in April. The kind of Nashville Saturday where the air smells like dogwood and everyone is looking for a reason to be out. My son called me on the Tuesday before and I could hear the energy in his voice, the barely contained nervousness of a man standing on the edge of something big. I was proud of him. Even after everything, I was still proud. Then he told me not to come. He did not say it cruelly. That was the thing that took me a moment to process. He said it the way you tell someone the party is formal, and you notice they only own casual clothes. He said it like he was doing me a favor. Dad, the whole concept is very curated. It's a specific guest list. People from the food and media scene. Investors my wife's family knows. It's not really a family dinner kind of night. You'd spend the whole time feeling out of place, and honestly, it might throw off the energy we're trying to create. We'll have you over for a quiet dinner next week, just us. I asked him if he was serious. He said he was. I asked him if he remembered where the $63,000 came from. There was a pause. Then he said, "Dad, money doesn't buy an invitation to something like this. That's not how it works. You gave that because you wanted to support me. This is a professional event." I said, "All right, son." He thanked me and hung up, and I sat in my kitchen for a long time looking at my hands. These hands had wired the building his restaurant was in. I had bid on that commercial strip 15 years ago when the neighborhood was still rough and nobody wanted it. I had paid cash for 3 of the 4 units on that block. The unit my son's restaurant occupied was mine. He had signed a lease with my property management company, Greer Commercial Holdings, without ever once asking who owned Greer Commercial Holdings. He had been paying me rent for 8 months of build-out and soft opening prep, or rather, I had been paying myself rent from one account to another, because I had been covering his payments every single month, along with everything else. He thought he was a tenant of a faceless LLC. He thought his father was a retired electrician who fixed outlets on weekends. He had no idea he was about to host the biggest night of his professional life in a building that belonged to his father. I did not go to the opening. I sat at home and watched a baseball game and ate a sandwich and went to bed at 10 o'clock like I always do. In the morning, I saw the photos on social media because my brother showed them to me. He lives in Knoxville, and he had been following the restaurant account because he was proud of his nephew in the way that uncles are proud. Generously and without conditions. He texted me the link without comment. I think he already understood. The photos were beautiful. The restaurant looked exactly the way my son had described it to me over months of excited phone calls. Warm light, reclaimed wood tables, mason jar candles, a chalkboard wall with the menu written in chalk, my daughter-in-law in a black dress that probably cost more than my monthly truck payment, laughing with a woman who had a food column in a local magazine, my son in a blazer I had never seen before, raising a glass to a room full of people I did not recognize. 200 people. My brother counted in the background of a video someone posted. 200 people in a restaurant that seated 90, with a patio they had strung with lights. I helped string the electrical for. On a cold Wednesday afternoon, 2 months prior, I kept scrolling. I saw my daughter-in-law's parents at a table near the window. Her father had a bottle of champagne open in front of him. I saw her mother holding up a toast. In the caption of one photo, my daughter-in-law had written, "Surrounded by the people who believed in us from day one." I put my phone down. I did not call my son that morning. I did not call the next day either. I went to work. I had a wiring job on a new build in Brentwood, and I focused on the work the way I have always focused on the work, methodically and completely. There is a meditative quality to electrical work that I have never been able to explain to people who have not done it. You have to be present. One mistake, and you burn a building down. It keeps your mind from drifting. On Wednesday, my son called me, not to apologize, to tell me the opening had been incredible. Media coverage. A wait list already forming. His wife's family's friends had connected them with a potential investor interested in opening a second location. His voice was high and bright, and he talked for 15 minutes without once asking how I was or whether I had seen the photos. I listened. I said, "That's great. Son, in the right places." Then I told him I had to get back to work. That evening I drove to the commercial strip on Fern Avenue where Linden and Ash was located. I sat in my truck across the street and looked at the building. The lights were on inside. Through the window I could see the silhouettes of people dining. My son and his wife had turned a neglected piece of my portfolio into something genuinely alive. I cannot pretend otherwise. It was good work, and part of me ached with pride, and part of me ached with something that did not have a clean name. I called my property manager, a woman named Diane who had worked for Greer Commercial Holdings for 11 years. She answered on the second ring the way she always does. "Diane," I said, "pull up the Linden and Ash file." She pulled it up. Unit C. 1,400 square feet. 3-year, lease signed 8 months ago. Current monthly rent, $4,200. All payments current through my personal subsidy transfers. "What do you need?" she asked. I told her to stop the automatic transfer from my personal account covering their rent. She was quiet for a moment. "Walter," she said. And that was all. "I know," I said. "The next payment is due in 9 days." "I know." She asked if I was sure. I told her I was sure. She said she would make a note in the file. Then she asked, gently, the way a person asks something they already know the answer to, whether this was connected to the opening. I told her it was connected to a lot of things. She said, "Okay, Walter. I'll leave it in your hands." I sat across the street from my building for another few minutes. A couple walked out of the restaurant holding hands, the woman laughing at something the man said. They looked happy. The restaurant was making people happy. My son had built something real, and he had done it. In no small part. With my money, and on my land, and with my electricity running through the walls. I started the truck and drove home. 9 days later my son called, and the brightness was gone from his voice. He said there was a problem with the rent. The management company had sent a notice of late payment with a fee attached. He said his accountant had flagged it, and he needed me to make the transfer. I was at the diner on Charlotte Avenue, where I eat breakfast most mornings. The coffee is terrible, and the eggs are perfect, and the same waitress has worked the early shift for as long as I have been coming. Her name is Rosie, and she has a daughter in nursing school, and she works 6 days a week with the particular dignity of someone who has never confused hard work with embarrassment. I told my son I could not make the transfer this month. He laughed. Not a real laugh, a short, confused sound. "What do you mean you can't?" I said things had been tight. My pension distribution was delayed. I had a truck repair and a medical bill. "Dad," he said, his voice dropping, "we need that rent money. We just opened. We don't have reserves yet. I have a payroll to make. If we miss rent, the first month it goes on our business credit. It affects everything." I said I understood and I was sorry. He said, "Can you borrow against something? Can you call the bank?" I told him I would see what I could do. He said, "I need to know by Friday." I told him I would try. Friday came. I did not call. He called me 3 times. I let it go to voicemail. The messages went from puzzled to frustrated to something that sounded almost like panic underneath the bravado. The third message said, "Dad, this is not okay. I have real responsibilities now. This is a business, not a hobby. I need you to come through for me." I listened to all 3 messages. Then I listened to them again. I had a real memory right then. My son was 7 years old, and I was teaching him to ride a bike in the driveway of our house in Madison. He fell twice, and both times I helped him up, and both times he pushed his helmet back on his head and tried again without being asked. He had something in him then, something self-generating and willing. I had always wondered where it went. I called my attorney. His name is Raymond Park, and he has handled my commercial holdings for 12 years. I told him I wanted to issue a formal notice of lease violation and intent to terminate for non-payment. Raymond said, "This is a family situation, Walter. Are you sure you want to go through the formal channel?" I said yes. He asked if my son knew I owned the building. I said no. There was a pause. Raymond said, "All right. I'll draft the notice from Greer Commercial Holdings. Standard format. It will reference the lease by number. No personal language. No indication of your involvement. I said that was exactly what I wanted. The notice was delivered the following Tuesday. Certified mail and a hard copy slipped under the commercial unit's door. I had Diane handle the delivery personally, so there would be no confusion. My son called me 40 minutes after the estimated delivery time. His voice had a quality I had not heard before. It was stripped of everything performative. No charm, no salesmanship, no carefully managed tone. He sounded like a child. Dad. Something really bad happened. The building management sent a termination notice. Not a late notice. A termination. They're saying they're going to void the lease. Dad. We cannot lose this space. Do you understand what that means? Everything is in this space. The equipment, the staff, the reservations. We have a wait list. We are finally getting coverage. If we lose this space, we lose everything. Please, I know you don't have the 4,200, but do you have anything? Anything at all? I let him finish. Then I said, "Who owns the building, son?" He said, "What?" I asked again. "Who owns the building Linden and Ash is in?" He said it was some holding company. Greer Commercial. He said he had never dealt with them directly, that his wife had handled the lease, signing with their real estate attorney. I said, "And you never looked into who owns Greer Commercial Holdings?" There was a pause that stretched long enough to feel physical. I heard him breathing. "Dad," he said slowly. I didn't say anything. "Dad, are you—" I waited. "Are you Greer Commercial?" I said. "I have owned that block since 2009. I bought it with the money I made, wiring the Hillsborough Village development. I paid cash." The silence on the other end of the phone was total. The kind of silence that means something has just been understood. "You own the building," he said. Not a question anymore. "I own the building," I said. Then why his voice broke. And when it came back, it had a raw, unsteady quality. "Then why did you let us sign a lease like strangers? Why didn't you just tell us? Why didn't you say, 'When was I going to tell you?'" I asked. "At the grand opening you didn't invite me to?" Another silence. "I would have been at that opening," I said. And my voice stayed steady, because I had practiced this part in my truck on the drive home from the diner. The part where I said what needed to be said, without falling apart. I would have stood in the back in my best shirt, and I would have watched you and been the proudest man in the room. I would not have said a word about the $63,000, or the rent I've been paying every month, or the wiring I did in those walls on a Wednesday afternoon in February, when it was 38 degrees, and you texted me to pick up a six-pack on the way over. I would have just been your father, watching his son do something real. But I was not invited, because I was not the right kind of person for the energy of the room. He said, "Dad." I said, "You told me money doesn't buy an invitation." He said my name again. I said, "The formal notice stands, son. You have 14 days to pay the outstanding balance and fees in full, or the lease is terminated." That's not me talking. That's the lease you signed. I hung up. I am not going to tell you I felt good. I am not going to describe it as relief or satisfaction, because those are too clean for what it actually felt like. It felt like removing a splinter that had been in deep for a long time. The removal hurts more than you expect, even though you know it's necessary. I went back to work. I had a service call in Germantown, a commercial kitchen that had been tripping a breaker. I diagnosed it in 40 minutes and fixed it in another 20. On the way out, the chef, a young woman who couldn't have been older than 25, thanked me and offered me a cup of coffee. I sat at the prep counter and drank it, and she told me she had just taken over this kitchen from a chef who had retired, and she was terrified. I told her that feeling meant she cared, and caring was the foundation everything else had to be built on. She looked at me and said, "That's really good advice." I left a 20 under my coffee cup and drove to my next job. Over the following week, my son called 12 times. My daughter-in-law called 4 times. Her calls were not requests. They were demands framed as emergencies. her voice sharp and certain in the way of someone who has never truly been told no by anyone who mattered. She said I was being vindictive. She said I was punishing them for one mistake. She said the opening night thing was a business decision, not a personal one, and that I was conflating the two because I was older and could not understand how branding worked in the current environment. She said her parents were prepared to get involved if necessary. I let every call go to voicemail. I listened to every message once. On day 10, my son showed up at my house. He knocked on the door at 7 in the evening. I was eating dinner. I let him in. He sat at my kitchen table, and he looked at me across the plates, and the salt shaker, and the glass of sweet tea, and he looked, for the first time in a long time, like someone who had been genuinely humbled rather than temporarily inconvenienced. He said, I don't have the money. I said, I know. He said, her parents offered to loan us enough to cover it, but they want equity, and we'd lose majority control. I said, that sounds like a business problem. He flinched. Dad, can we just talk? Not about the rent. Not about the lease. Can we just talk? I put my fork down. I looked at my son. I thought about the bike in the driveway again. I thought about the calluses on my hands and the ones on his that he did not have. Talk, I said. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I was ashamed of you. I did not move. Not of you, he said, correcting himself, and then not correcting himself. Of the gap. Of the way it would look. Her family's friends, the food writers, the investors, they all have a certain picture in their head of who we are and where we come from, and I didn't want you there complicating that picture. I didn't want someone asking how we funded this and having to explain. I didn't want the conversation. I was taking the easy way, and I told myself I was doing you a favor, and I was lying. He said, I'm sorry. I looked at him for a long time. I thought about whether the apology was for me or for the lease. I thought about how a person can say the true thing for the wrong reason and whether the true thing still counts. I said, I believe you. But believing you and fixing the lease are two different things. He asked what he needed to do. I told him the balance was $4,200 in back rent plus $300 in late fees, and he had 4 days remaining on the notice period. He asked if I would defer it. Give him 90 days. I said no. He asked if I would forgive it. I said no. He sat with that for a moment. Then he asked if there was any version of this where he kept the restaurant. I said there was one. He looked up. I told him I would not terminate the lease, and I would not defer the outstanding balance. What I would do was renegotiate. He would pay the back balance on a 6-month payment plan. The rent going forward he would pay himself. No transfers from my account. No subsidy of any kind. He would get a business line of credit, manage his own payroll, handle his own margins. He was a grown man running a real business, and he needed to run it like one. He asked about the apartment. I told him the apartment was a separate matter, and the answer was the same. I had been covering that rent for 3 years. I would give him 60 days, and then it was his expense. He said, that's everything. The apartment and the restaurant together, we're talking about almost $11,000 a month. I said, yes. He said, we can't cover that right now. I said, then you need to get smaller before you can get bigger. That's not a punishment. That's how it works. He stared at the table for a long time. I watched him doing arithmetic in his head. The hard kind. The kind that doesn't leave room for ambition or image. Just numbers against numbers. Then he said, okay. I said, okay, what? He said, okay, I'll do it. The payment plan, the rent, all of it. I'll figure it out. I looked at my son. I was looking for the 7-year-old on the bike, and I found him somewhere in there. Underneath all the blazers and the branding. Still there. Still willing to get back up. I told him one more thing. I said, next time you have an opening, you call your family first. Not after you've filled the room with investors. First. Thanks for watching. And the next time you have a now that's setting this video, we show up in whatever we're wearing, and we stand in the back, and we are proud of you, and you don't get to take that from us, because it doesn't fit your aesthetic." He nodded. His eyes were wet, and he did not look away. That mattered to me. He left at 8:30. I cleaned up my kitchen and sat on the back porch for a while and listened to the neighborhood settle into night. Somewhere down the street, a dog was barking at something it couldn't see. The air smelled like cut grass and the beginning of spring. I called my brother in Knoxville. We talked for an hour about nothing important. His garden, my truck, a fishing trip we had been saying we would take for 3 years and had not taken. By the end of the call, we had a date on the calendar, last week of May. His pond, my poles, and no agenda. I want to tell you what happened after, because I know that's what you're wondering. Linden and Ash is still open. My son took a second job consulting for a hotel group, handling their social media, 3 days a week, early mornings before his lunch service starts. My daughter-in-law started catering private events on weekends to build reserve capital. They moved out of the East Nashville apartment into a smaller place in a less fashionable zip code with a much more manageable rent. It has not been easy. I know this because my son calls me more now than he did when I was paying for everything. And the calls are different. They are about actual things, a problem with a supplier, advice on a staff conflict, whether he should accept a buyout offer on a catering contract. He asks questions, and he listens to the answers. That is new. My daughter-in-law called me last month, not to ask for anything. She called to tell me she had been thinking about what she said to those women at the opening. The specific people comment, the energy of the room comment. And she said she had been wrong, and she was sorry. She did not dress it up. She just said it plainly. I thanked her for saying so, and I meant it. I went to the restaurant 2 weeks ago for the first time. My son seated me himself at a table by the window. He brought out 4 courses personally, explaining each dish, watching my face for the reaction. The food was extraordinary. I told him so, and he ducked his head the way he used to as a boy when I praised him. That particular mixture of pride and uncertainty that is the most honest expression a person can make. His wife came out at the end of the meal and sat with me for a few minutes. She told me they had named a dish after my mother, her great-grandmother-in-law who she had never met. A southern banana pudding served in a mason jar with a handwritten card tucked inside that explained who the recipe was named for. She said she hoped I did not mind. I told her I did not mind at all. When I left, my son walked me to my truck. He looked at the cracked windshield and said he had a guy who could fix that for less than $100 if I wanted the number. I told him I had been meaning to get to it. He wrote the number in a text and sent it to me as I was pulling out of the lot. I got the windshield fixed that Thursday. I want to end with this because I think it's the part that actually matters, more than the eviction notice, more than the lease negotiation, more than any of the dramatic moments in between. The most dangerous thing I ever did was make it easy for my son to believe that love was something that arrived automatically, without effort, without reciprocity, like the rent money appearing in his account on the first of the month every single time. I thought I was giving him security. I was giving him a blindness instead, a comfortable inability to see what things actually cost and who was paying. Real love sometimes means stopping the automatic transfer. It means letting the notice arrive and standing behind it. It means sitting across a kitchen table in your work clothes and saying, "I see you. I believe in you. And I am not going to protect you from your own life anymore." That is the hardest thing I have ever built. Harder than any building on any block in this city. And it is the only one I am genuinely proud of. If this story meant something to you, hit the like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to Revenge Saga for more real stories about the moments that change everything. And drop a comment right now. Tell me where you are watching from and what time it is there. I want to know who's in this with me.